everyone. Thanks very much for joining. I'm Emma Maslen. I'm the CEO of inspir'em. Today we're going to be talking about pipeline reconciliation plans. We're going to be continuing our series talking about pipeline. Can't believe that tomorrow is March. We are still talking about pipeline, but we've had a very busy week at inspir'em, and it seems that all of our customers are continuing to talk about pipeline, even though we're 2 months into the beginning of the calendar year. Shortly, I'll be talking about pipeline reconciliation plans, just following on that theme from what we've been talking about, bringing together some of the points from the previous weeks. But just give you a little bit of an idea of where we're going to be going next. So we've got 2 more webinars that are left in the series. The next webinar we're going to be talking about is the review. So in your weekly review, how to make sure you're tracking progress and getting done the things that you need to get done. And in the final webinar of the series, we're going to be joined by Clarify again, who are going to be talking about high impact communication. So in the sea of communications that are going out to our customers currently, how can you be the one that makes the difference? So how can you make sure that your email, your LinkedIn, whatever the thing is that you go out to your customers, how can you make sure that you're the one that gets the conversion and not other people? So looking forward to seeing those. So that'll be in 2 weeks and in 2 weeks' time. Okay. So today we're going to be going through pipeline reconciliation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through a little bit of a recap on some of the things that we've talked about, and then also I'm going to show you actually the build of a pipeline reconciliation plan as well. And then I've got some frequently asked questions that we've been working with our customers on, just to go through some of the questions that you might have around best practices around building pipeline reconciliation plans. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat or into the Q&A. Lucy will also be posting some additional resources for you as well, so feel free to do that. Okay. Did I see somebody put their hand up and then put the hand down? If you want to put a question in the chat, feel free to do that. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, you should all see my screen, okay? So, so just a bit of a recap on the webinar series that's coming up. So as I mentioned, we've got a couple left in the pipeline series that's going to be running. We'll then take a pause for Easter, and the summer series is going to be on champions, identifying champions, coaches versus champions, bit of a recap on some top tips around champion planning. We're going to be joined by some sales reps for that series, talking about how they work with champions. And towards the end of the year, in the autumn, starting in September, running through to Thanksgiving, we're going to be covering decision process and mutual success plans. Okay. So as we've mentioned previously, pipeline generation is about choice. The bigger pipeline we have, the more we put in the top of the funnel, the better off we're going to be as we sort of go through our sales cycles and through the quarters, giving us choice. And the way that we best do that is we do that through pipeline reconciliation plans, which is essentially the art of working out all of the places that you could go, and then really focusing in on the places that you could make the material difference today. When I was chatting with some of the team before this session, oh, my lights have just gone out. Okay, let me just sort my lights out. Embarrassing. When I was talking to the team about before we even started this session today, we were talking about the cycle of a quarter, and the reality is in most quarters, you only really have about 9 weeks. Bizarrely, Q1 is probably the fullest week you have because we have less holidays and less interruptions, but most quarters are really only 9 weeks. So what we really need to think about is how can we make the biggest impact within those 9 weeks? And that's all about prioritization and pipeline reconciliation. So we talked before about having your goals at the heart of pipeline reconciliation, your territory plan and your ICP absolutely need to be within there. The pipeline reconciliation is how you capture all of that and what you're going to do. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this next time, which is about cookbooks and leading indicators, measuring all of that essentially through the CRM. So what I was going to do is I was going to show you a pipeline reconciliation almost process, if you like, about how you can think about pipeline reconciliation and start to build this out. So sort of show you one in motion, if you like. So let me share this. So hopefully Let me just make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. So this is a pipeline reconciliation in Miro. So just to give you an example of how you would build this out. So remember that pipeline reconciliation plans are typically some sort of mind map. That's the way that they are put together. The reason why they're done in a mind map and they're not done in the CRM is because these are ideas and they're not opportunities at this point. Some opportunities will feature in here because they might be things you want to grow, but essentially this is your ideas board. As we talked about before, you start with your personal goals in the middle, you think about your conversion, so that gives you what sort of pipeline you need. You think about the gap that you need, and then you start building out from there. So in this particular example that I've got my personal goals in the center. You have options then about how you then segment your pipeline reconciliation plan. A couple of things that I've done in the past. In this particular instance, existing accounts versus new accounts might be the beginning of the segmentation. The other option that you have, which I've also used, is you do it by quarter. So be thinking about your quarterly capacity and the opportunities that you have. You might decide to have Q1, Q2, 3, and 4 around your personal goals and be thinking, well, where could you campaign first and then second and going through the year? It doesn't really matter which way you do it. The point is you need to try and get down to the point where you're really thinking about the segmentation and where you're going to go. You cannot pipeline generate into all accounts at once. You have to have some sort of prioritization. So the prioritization is the important thing. The how you get there is slightly less important, but think about all lenses. So in this example that I've got here, what I've done is I've just taken some social media accounts, and I've then started to sort of segment that. And I've said, I've got some existing accounts and some new accounts. I might then look at trying to cross-sell across new departments. So I've started to segment Google, for example, into new opportunities and existing departments. I'm really starting to sort of spread out that pipeline reconciliation to think, okay, so where could I go? Now, this only becomes useful if you're then going to put some numbers against it, because remember, the goal is for us to reconcile back to the pipeline and be thinking where we're going to go. So what you then have to start thinking about is starting to put some either product tags against this, or you might put department tags against it, where you start thinking, well, the IT compliance division of YouTube could generate 100K, the application development team could generate 200K, etc. So the idea here is you're thinking about all of those departments and thinking about where you can go. So if you think about your territory planning, because you will have done a territory planning exercise to start segmenting your accounts, this is almost going into the account planning phase, if you like, because you've segmented certain accounts, you're thinking about the priority accounts that you have, but then you're also then really starting to drill into those accounts and thinking about cross-sell, upsell, or all of the places that you could go. And essentially, you keep going with that. You keep going with that. You keep building it out. You keep prioritizing, thinking about the different accounts. And then you start to then spin that out into those different product areas. And the idea here is that the outside of the spider, the outside of the mind map, should then give you the choice to deliver against those personal goals. Now, there is potentially a point here where you get into analysis paralysis, because if you have a big territory, many territories are between 100 and 250 accounts. You could find yourself in a situation where you've got this absolutely ginormous mind map. The recommendation isn't that you build out an absolutely ginormous mind map. You should have done your territory segmentation before, so you have a bit of an idea of where to go. You build out enough that can get you going for a few weeks on the pipeline road, but then you need to start executing and then developing your plan as you go. What you absolutely do not want to do is think about spending weeks and weeks developing a PRP and then there's no execution, because the year will run away with itself. It needs to be a little and often, building it little and often, a plan that you constantly come back to. So if anybody needs some further examples of these, then we can send something through. So just let us know. Okay. So I'm just going to go back to... Oh, I'll just share the right slides. That's how you'll be sort of building out your PRP, if you like. So make sure it's little and often, and trying to encapsulate as many of those opportunities as possible. So things that should be included within that PRP and within your territory plan. Again, make sure that your territory analysis is in there, the segmentation is in there, some of your account planning is in there, but also key compelling events like your renewals. I don't think you can really build out a PRP, particularly with existing customers, if you don't understand where those contract end dates are and the opportunities you have for upsell and cross-sell, because they're really key to make sure that you're driving those opportunities. Now, a new asset that we've just put on the platform, if anybody needs it, is we've just put on a pipeline reconciliation planning checklist and best practices document. We'll provide a link to that. It's in actually the lesson 2 that Lucy's just put into the chat. But you can download this, and it encompasses all the things that we've talked about so far. But essentially, it gives you a little bit of a checklist to try and see where you could go. Now, one of the things we were talking about to some clients earlier this week was what happens if you think that territory and ICP is wrong once you've started building out that pipeline plan. That happens. Actually, the good news is if you're reviewing your pipeline reconciliation plan often and you find that territory ICP is not correct, then the great opportunity is you can go back and correct that and then work on it. Really important to be doing that. Because you want to make sure that you're consistently driving into those right opportunities. The other really great best practice we've seen as well is making sure that across different countries, divisions, industries, you are sharing your segmentation with other people to see if they've got any ideas about how they would segment. Because there may be a chance that maybe you've missed something. So if you can do a peer review on your pipeline reconciliation plans and on territory planning, it's really worth doing that, because you never know what ideas you may get. Okay. Also, if you're looking to do that territory planning and you haven't quite got there yet and you're looking for some ideas, in that same place within the platform, there is also a territory planning spreadsheet, which gives you an idea of how to start thinking about segmentation and territory planning. As I mentioned, if you've got a regular size enterprise patch between 100 and 250 accounts, before you start drawing that diagram, make sure that you've done some level of segmentation first of all, because otherwise you'll just be there for hours. The PRP doesn't have to look pretty, but it needs to be functional. If we don't understand what those priority 1 accounts are, we're really going to struggle. And also making sure that the deal sizes that you're looking for, you have got a spread and you understand what you need to do to achieve your target. We talked on the last webinar and the one before, in fact, about capacity off the back of pipeline. It's so important that you consistently drive pipeline, but of the right deal sizes, to make sure that you don't peak too early with capacity. Because the worst possible situation you have is you have customers who are interested, but they can't be serviced because you are too busy with lots of other opportunities. So making sure you've got a mix of where you're going is going to be really important. Okay. And then when you get to the outside of your mind map and you've fleshed out the accounts, the subsidiaries, the parent companies, you're thinking about where you're going to go, the product areas, those types of things, really do make sure that you're thinking about then the personas and the different departments that you could go to. Because just like the different subsidiaries, there'll be opportunities. In many cases, there will be different personas, different teams that you could go to as well. And this is where the sort of PRP meets a cookbook, which is the day-to-day activities. The more specific you are, the more you can understand what's the activity you need to do. So if you've got target personas that include, several divisions, you've got to go to 5 different divisions. What you can then do is list those out and then cross those off your list as you go through them. As part of the review, which we'll talk about next time in 2 weeks, as part of the review, it's then really important we go back to that and see, well, what success did we have? So were we successful with those reach outs? What was the message, etc.? It will also give you an idea when you draw it out on a PRP where your themes are. You might have several CIOs you're going to, several CISOs that you go to. You may decide that you might campaign based on role rather than account, and that's okay too. Again, once you're presented with all of that opportunity, it will give you an idea of where you'd like to go. Okay. Please do put any questions in the chat if you have any. I've got some questions from some of our customers as well. It's worth just mentioning that once you've highlighted those personas and you've started to identify who those people are, you do make sure that that goes in the CRM, because this is the point at which, on the very outside of that mind map, that's where you have to start recording things in the system of record. Before that, I would suggest you need to be a little bit careful about what you're recording in the CRM. Maybe there's some campaigns that you want to record, but remember that that is ideas in the PRP. They're not opportunities. So just make sure you're following your own company rules around identification of opportunities and registering that as pipeline. Then once you have that mind map and you start to then really, get into the execution, again, come back to making sure that you're executing on a regular basis and really following up those opportunities, and then doing that review at the end of the week. Because only by doing that can we see what's converting, what's not converting, what's working, and what's not. And similarly for the campaigns as well, particularly if you're a BDR, you'll probably have some very specific messaging that you're going out with, some nurture campaigns, those types of things. The review is really important to see what's working, what's not working, and using some of that sort of enriched marketing data around what people are clicking on, what assets are they engaging with. Important that we look at that, because it gives us an idea of maybe what's resonating, but maybe if the customer isn't taking that call to action and booking a meeting with us, then perhaps something that's wrong there in the conversion. Okay. And it takes a while to do this, right? So drawing out that PRP, we talked about this last time with David Mayer from Clarify around cycling through accounts. Conversion rates for pipeline generation are generally low. Referrals will get you the higher rate of conversion, but this is a numbers game. The more you spend the time, the more you do your research, the more you work out what's converting, what's not converting, the better the skill that you get at this, the better the conversion, the easier it will be. In the beginning, it is going to be a bit of a numbers game. If you don't spend the time, then you won't get the opportunity. So make sure you have a think about that. Okay. So typical questions. So feel free to put some questions in the chat. We had some come up. We've run a couple of sessions on this week. So some questions that I'll share with you around what other customers are asking. When you complete a PRP, should you do it for all quarters? Should it always be a full rolling quarter plan? Ideally, yes, it should be a rolling 4-quarter plan. We are currently in February. You should be thinking all the way around to next year. The reality is, though, as I mentioned earlier, you won't have a complete and full plan. Things will change. Also, throughout the year, what should happen is campaigns will drive different behavior. There may also be different regulatory campaigns that you might run that are specifically point in time. So if any of you are working to the DORA regulation at the moment in Europe, there's a big milestone that's just passed. There's another big milestone that's coming up towards the end of the year. You may not be campaigning for that. So things will change. You will need to adapt. So you should have a plan certainly for the quarter and be thinking about the next quarter, but you don't have to have a fully fleshed out plan. You should certainly be prioritizing those accounts. So think about a couple of quarters and a loose plan sort of rolling into Q3, Q4. Revise that monthly. We also get asked the question around what are the best tools for a PRP. Personally, I think spider diagram mind map is probably the best that there is. I've seen lots of people do it in spreadsheets. If your mind works that way, then absolutely you can have it as a list. I personally, my mind doesn't work that way, so I find it easier to sort of spin campaigns off of different areas, and you can then link maybe some different accounts together. Maybe they're linked by partners, those types of things. So it can be a bit more 3-dimensional, I think, if it's in a Miro. So Miro, Lucidchart, really good tools to use. And then once you've started to identify those opportunities, you then put it in the CRM. Probably the one exception I would say is if you're doing account planning. I've often seen, and I know Jen's seen this as well, we often see account plans and targets go into the CRM quite early because there is a desire from organizations to make sure that you're getting breadth across large accounts. So that's also something you might want to have a think about for those larger accounts. The other question, again, we answered this on the previous webinar that we had, which was how long do you work an account before you cycle it out? Depends what type of account it is. If it's a large enterprise account, usually we would recommend really working it for 4 weeks in terms of research, picking up personas, targeting those personas, your reach out, bearing in mind you've got to do several reach outs to really get to the people you need to get to. You're probably looking at 4 weeks of hitting a brick wall before you need to think about cycling that out, and maybe 10 at any one time. So that's the sort of numbers you can work to. If you're an AE, that is, if you're BDRs, I know their numbers are higher. So that's something to be having a think about there. With corporate accounts, it tends to be a slightly smaller time span. So say 2 to 3 weeks for those smaller accounts, those more commercial accounts, apologies for not corporate accounts. And then the other great question we had this week was how many outreaches do you do before you give up? Which is a similar question to the how long does it take before you decide to cycle out an account. I would say how many assets have you got that have got value? Going back to things that we talked about before around the number of touches that it takes, the number of positioning of value before a customer wants to meet with you because they see something that's interesting, that they trust what you're saying, you need to go at it for a while. So what I would suggest in that case around the number of reach outs is really think about the value that you're delivering to the customer in that reach out. Make sure it's not just a coffee call. Can I make an introduction? Have you done your research? Do you know what that customer is interested in? Do you know that persona, how that persona is bonused, how they, what their pains are, how they like to be addressed, what their language is? If you're getting all of those things right, and then you're going with something of value, you know, chances are you're going to get a hit when you're a couple of messages in. If you're not doing those things, you know, you're not talking their language, you're not doing your research, etc., then unfortunately you'll either get lucky the more you do, or it's never going to happen. So just make sure that you do your upfront research. You should be doing that anyway if you're thinking about segmenting your accounts. Do that, capture that, try and talk the customer's language. You'll stand a greater chance of getting through. And on that particular point, what I would say again is the webinar we're going to do it's going to be in 4 weeks' time with Clarify again, talking about high impact communication. There is a lot of noise out there, so you need to try and find a way of standing out. Okay, so we're very nearly at time. Just wait to see if there are any questions that we had from the team today. So if anybody's got a question, if you wanted to put that in the chat. And Lucy's put some great resources in the chat as well around the new pipeline blog that's come out this week and some of those assets that I was just mentioning. And also, if you missed the webinar with David 2 weeks ago, definitely have a look at that as well. A really interesting conversation on TAM ICP. Okay, so we've got no questions today. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for joining. So the next session is going to be on tracking progress. We're going to talk about how you do that with leading indicators. Make sure you get some very valuable time in for pipeline generation over the next couple of weeks. And then we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody.